Three young boys were left without a father figure and in deep, utter confusion for the comfortable and warm family life they had known while growing up. Their father, and the victim of this story, Eric Richins, died March 3rd, 2022, just a few feet away from where the boys were fast asleep in their bedroom at 3 a.m. These boys, ages 10, 9, and 6, had said goodbye and goodnight to their father one last time, while no one, well, maybe almost no one, had known that this would be the last time they would see Eric alive. Now, Eric, he wasn't a bad guy. He was known as a good guy, an honest guy, just trying to get by, raising his kids, raising his family in a good life. Born March 19th, 1982, to Linda and Jean Richins, he was known to be around the house, helping out around his two sisters, hauling hay, putting fences together, and in his early life, he was a coach. He was an avid hunter, with deer especially. He was the type of guy that wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, not afraid to put in some elbow grease, an avid outdoorsman, and running a cattle ranch. And someone like that is really going to not take anything from anyone. There's no time for that when you're on a cattle ranch and putting in the hard labor that it takes to take care of animals, especially when those values teach you how to be a good family man and father and husband later in your life, when you are just trying your best out in Utah, which is where he ended up living and raising his family. He was an honest dollar type of guy, and not only knew how to be dependable to himself and his family, but to his community. And not only himself, but the whole Richins family is well respected, one of the largest and oldest families of Summit County. So much so that a member of their family, Sheldon Richins, is actually named after a building in Summit County in an area called Kimball Junction. And something like that just really speaks to the value that they have contributed to the area of Utah and how valued they are by members of their community that see them as important. All of this coupled is probably part of the biggest reasons why it has taken up such a tragedy. Why, when this truth came out in the Summit County area of Utah, it has changed up a lot of the community. Knowing that this area wasn't really a party town, it wasn't an extravagant, skyscraper-filled town. It was a quiet area where you were supposed to feel safe enough to raise your family, where you were supposed to be calm enough and to just go to work and live your life. But it didn't continue ending up being that way, especially because of this case and the tragedy that unfolded with the community that now has to deal with, well, this was a well-known family, and now they have some of the darkest paths taken by some of the people that were a part of the family, and, well, that wasn't always the case, especially back in 2013 of June, when Kouri and Eric got married. They had been dating for a few years and actually had their first son throughout that time. And during this is when they realized that they loved each other and they were intimate enough to where they would even have a marriage that had the ceremony in their backyard of where they were living, which is one of the most heartfelt and close things that you can do as a family. Now, around this time, Kouri Darden and Eric Richins, they were still relatively young. He was about 31 and she was about 23. And even though they had that one son, their family would eventually start to grow a bit more. But before that, going back in time to 2009, where Eric was around 26 and he would soon begin to start his stone masonry business, this type of business where you are really working with your hands, you're carving up stone, you're crafting these things, these structures, things that would become part of homes, things that would become part of businesses, these stone structures that would have a beauty towards them, where you would probably have a deep passion for this kind of work in order to get into this business, which was C&E Stone Masonry LLC, that he would eventually build with his business partner and friend, Kouri Wright. These two men were very business savvy as far as doing business around their town and building something that would be reliable enough to start a joint life insurance policy, which is what they did. And being that they were so savvy, they were able to think this through in terms of how do we build this business over years? How do we take care of our families? And how do we make sure that we're going to be okay if we're no longer here one day? And that is how they really kept things up. They were making good money and they were doing good things with this business, which is what would lead them to soon have future decisions as far as this business would go, because that wasn't the end of that venture that they had together. It would soon get very dynamic. Now, throughout this time, throughout their relationship unfolding and them raising their kid, that wouldn't be the only thing that Kouri would be dealing with in her life. Around 2019, she had also started her own business, but she took a different route into real estate. The real estate business that a lot of people do nowadays, where you are investing a lot of money and trying to have a big return of profit. So Kouri Richins LLC, pretty much directly after herself, this is a business that she was known to take a lot of pride in, and it was one of her biggest passions as well, where you put in money to a home. Maybe that home is not so much so finished, maybe it's kind of a run down place that needs a little bit of fixing up, so she would buy her fixer-uppers and she would sell them. She would try and turn them around, and that was how she knew business. She was her own employee and she had her team. But even though Kouri had her own team with Kouri Richins Realty LLC and her own business model, her and Eric, they weren't really a team in terms of how close they were in their marriage. And not really that they hated each other at all, but they did end up signing a prenuptial agreement during their marriage licensing and all of that sorts, where it would say that each of them didn't own each other's money. They didn't have a joint income. They had separate income. They would make separate profits. They would handle their money separately. And all of their assets would be separate. If Eric were to ever pass away, or if ever something were to happen to him where he could no longer serve his business, his assets, his income, his business portfolio, the part of his half that Kouri Wright had the other half, well, it would then go to Kouri. So if that were to ever happen, not only would Kouri now be entitled to his half of C&E Masonry LLC, but her own real estate business, where she was actually said to be super passionate and be working on maybe 3 different or more houses at once. Greg Hall, who was her marketing director and business partner throughout her venture of this real estate business, would say that she was really invested into all of this.
Kouri had something that a lot of people don't. A lot of times you find an individual that is intelligent, but no common sense, or common sense and no intelligence. She had both. She was a brilliant young lady.
She really cared about each and every piece of property that she came across, and she was always looking for her big break or her next big and beautiful property to turn around and really present it to whoever the buyer would be. So yes, Eric was a lot more stone-headed, no pun intended, with how his choices were in his business. He really had a clear vision about how he wanted to approach things and go about his finances. But Kouri was a little bit on the opposite end. It was really questionable with her business, Kouri Richins LLC, and how she ran this business. You're investing hundreds of thousands, if not more, into each house that you are investing in to hopefully come out with a profit. Now, going back in time a little bit to clarify on this picture of Kouri Richins LLC, it was really a lot of up and downs for Kouri, and it's said to be maybe around 2016, or maybe even earlier, she was having a lot of financial troubles. She was not as good as she might have led everyone to believe, that she knew what she was doing with the loads of money that was going back and forth between her and her accounts, her business decisions and ventures. It was really fishy in that sort of way. Now, Kouri Benson Richins, who is the sister of Eric, she has a big voice in this entire case. She was a big part of how this case ended up to becoming what it was in the end. And she actually stated that she speculated maybe Kouri was actually stealing money from Eric. Maybe she wasn't so much so doing well as she led everyone to believe, with how she was getting well funded from her cash flow in terms of flipping these houses, but maybe she was using money from Eric's accounts. If it's going back in time as much as it is stated in this case, 2016 was years before they had even gotten married. So if she had started the business in 2019, and years before that she had been speculated to be stealing money from Eric already, well, how business savvy or how much of this real estate did she really have down as far as Greg Hall and what he claimed her passions to be? How passionate and how driven, how clear in this business really was she? This case goes deep with financial decisions, business decisions, putting money in places where it doesn't belong. So much so that in 2019, prosecutors alleged that Kouri went against Eric as a power of attorney and took out a deed of trust on the home where these boys were living, a $250,000 deed, and not only that, but she took it out as a line of credit behind his back, using these $250,000 for her own business ventures. To think that you would ever take money out against your home behind your partner's back is one thing, but that's just where this story begins. Kouri actually makes a snowball effect out of all of this, and it gets deeper. She actually continues this habit. It becomes a habit of taking money from Eric against his bank accounts, against his credit cards. In 2020, she actually took out another $100,000 against his credit cards, and behind his back she would do this. But he would soon find out. If you take out money from your credit card, you might get a call from the credit card company. Maybe Kouri didn't really understand this concept, but he ended up confronting her. He confronted her, and she admitted it. He actually sat her down and questioned her about the money that she had taken, and she did admit to it. But that's crazy to think about in the first place, that you're going to have to sit down with your partner to discuss hundreds of thousands of dollars that they took out behind your back. How much trust might there be in the relationship at that point? Not only that, but Eric and Kouri, they were actually able to figure out that she was taking money from the business bank accounts, and they were able to put a stop to it. They got on the phone with the bank, and they were able to take her out of it, and without telling her, actually, they went behind her back and got the sorts taken care of. Thankfully, at that point, they were not really discussing matters with her. This would go on to continue. In the late year of 2020, she was able to take more of his money. By doing this, she had signed over a lot of his rights as power of attorney, and she had actually previously forged his initials on a lot of this paperwork that he didn't know about. And when he was signing this, he didn't know that he was signing over the big bucks. Basically, he was signing over a lot of his assets, a lot of the access that he had to his money, and in a way that she was manipulating him and showing him that he was signing something that looked to be something safe, something that he would have never signed if he had known what her intentions were behind taking his rights over these things. Especially the spokesperson for Eric's family during this case, Greg Skordas, he actually said that Eric had no idea he was signing over such important rights, such substance, such assets, such funds, basically everything that mattered to him financially, he was signing over, and he wanted to trust Kouri.
It's taken a long time to get the evidence together and to put together a case, but the case has been filed. The family feels very comfortable that the case is in good hands and that justice will be served.
Well, as time would go on throughout 2020, Eric kind of started to decide to go behind Kouri's back, and he was now trying to just salvage everything that had been taken from him initially, not really entrusting in Kouri the entire time, but mostly in secret, trying to secure his funds, trying to make sure that this wouldn't happen again because of the way that Kouri was acting and her deceiving ways of presenting him in an innocent manner and ultimately just trying to go behind his back. And so now he was, in November, meeting with an estate planning lawyer who would really be a great credit in this case and really help Eric in terms of saving his future from anything that might happen to him, and how his funds and his business and the way that he was managing his assets would be handled in the future. Crystal Bowman Carter, the estate planning lawyer who will now be brought into this story, where Eric and her were to attend a private meeting together.
We do wills and trusts, probate, a little bit of business formation, and anything that goes along with estate planning.
The estate planning, the stuff you wish you got into when it's too late, usually is the case. It's the stuff you wish you would have taken care of after it's too late, really.
Yeah, that's right. You know, a large part of our business is creating durable powers of attorney,
yes,
and healthcare directives. Those are the kinds of things that help give power to an agent, somebody that you choose to make decisions for you in case you are unable to do that yourself. And if you don't do that, then yes, it's too late. Your family has to go to court to get guardianship or conservatorship in some cases, and that can make a stressful situation even more stressful.
But the two were to go over Eric's estate his living expenses, his at-home life, his business endeavors, and they were to restate everything that he had, basically. They wanted to actually do something in terms of take Kouri out of the whole situation. She was to no longer be a part of his trust, but who would take it over? Kouri Richins Benson, his sister. She was now to be appointed in his paperwork, in his filing trust, and she was to be able to, if anything ever happened to him, take on 50% of his funds, his business, the CNE Stone Masonry LLC, who was co-owner Kouri Wright. She was to be able to make decisions for that. Basically, all of his assets as he was living were to then be transferred over to Katie if anything had ever happened to him. Crystal Carter would go on to be a really powerful and credible voice in this case, especially during trial, when she would go on to explain why Eric wanted to do this and what his plans exactly were for the new Eric Richins Living Trust, and just what his plans were in order to do that, which she would say that he really, first of all, wanted to keep his kids safe, wanted to keep his at-home family life in check and organized the way that he envisioned, as far as what he had found out about the recent abuse of finances that Kouri was going behind his back to perform. And secondly, he wanted to make sure that if anything did ever happen to him and his sons were now to figure it out with Kouri as a family situation, that Kouri would never be in control of the decisions made after his death, his assets, or the home. And now keep in mind, Kouri was never told about any of this. It was a private meeting that he wanted to strictly keep Kouri out of. So anything that would happen in the future, she would then figure it out as a sort of whiplash. It would hit her in that moment as the information would unfold that she would never have control over what she thought she might have ever again. Alright everyone, now before we get on with the rest of this story and case, if you think that Eric Richins deserves to get justice after this tragedy that happened against him, go ahead and just punch that subscribe button as hard as you can in the next 5 seconds so that Kouri Richins can get off the screen. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Did you do it? Okay. Let's go on with the rest of this case. Yeah, she wasn't done just yet, and this entire case would eventually go deeper with her deviousness, where she would have the audacity, after multiple confrontations with Eric, of him asking, hey, what's going on? Where did all this money go? She would apologize and say that she was going to eventually pay every penny back that she stole from him, and not only that, but end up calling the insurance company policy, removing Cody and Eric as each other's beneficiary and replacing her name into the policy as the only and sole beneficiary. Shortly after that, Kouri wouldn't only just be demising more financial rigors behind Eric's back. No, it would get a lot worse than that, and she would actually end up text messaging with her housekeeper to get possession or to get sources for some prescription drug medication. This prescription drug medication that wasn't for her, but she would try and go on to give to a potential investor for a real estate project that she was working on at the time. The housekeeper, who is actually only identified in this case as CL, would go on to say that Kouri would text them multiple times asking for prescription pain medication. CL actually also said that Kouri not only asked for pain medication, but she specifically asked for fentanyl. You know, that drug that is causing an entire epidemic around the United States currently. And not only that, but CL also said that Kouri specifically asked for that Michael Jackson stuff. Michael Jackson overdosed. That's what he died from. And this is exactly what Kouri was asking for. For what reason? After multiple requests from Kouri, CL eventually got 15 to 30 fentanyl pills from a dealer in Ogden, Oregon. She would eventually go on to purchase these pills from CL for $900. Now, I'm asking myself, first of all, why would a wealthy investor that is helping Kouri with her real estate business need to ask Kouri for any sort of prescription drug medication, much less drugs? Couldn't they get them themselves? They are wealthy, they are well sourced, they might have insurance, they might have other people that they can go to and pay. Why would an investor need this, and why would Kouri feel obligated to do this for the investor? This part does not make any sense, especially that it's fentanyl. So it was just a few weeks later, around February 14th, when Valentine's Day was approaching. And just like any loving, happy, stable couple or marriage, Eric and Kouri were trying to come together and have a nice day. While in this case, it's stated that Kouri actually made Eric his favorite sandwich for their Valentine's Day dinner, but what would happen to Eric was pretty terrifying. He actually ended up getting a serious reaction from this, something so bad that he got so seriously sick, he was having trouble breathing. So much so that he had to inject himself with his son's EpiPen and drank an entire bottle of Benadryl. He actually ended up eventually passing out. This is such a crazy situation. Thankfully, he actually ended up being okay that night. He actually ended up going to sleep after drinking that bottle of Benadryl and having a serious reaction, but he didn't just end the night casually. It wasn't the same after that. He actually ended up thinking to himself, something is wrong here. That wasn't just any reaction. Someone is trying to get me. They're trying to do something to me and my well-being. And he thought to himself, I think I know who it is. It's Kouri. Eric became at least a little bit skeptical for what Kouri's intentions were against him, so much so that he ended up calling a friend, saying, I think she's trying to poison me. So, what do you think? Do you think that Kouri was just waiting for that one moment where she could finally give something lethal enough to Eric and just take him out? Because authorities actually, in this investigation, ended up finding out that maybe that wasn't the first time that Kouri had initially planned to harm Eric in this sort of way of poisoning him. Authorities say that just about 2 weeks after this allergic reaction that Eric had from his sandwich, that Kouri actually ended up texting CL again for another $900 worth of these fentanyl pills, these apparent prescription medication drugs that she was going to give to an investor yet again, but there really lacks any evidence that when she was at this showing that she actually handed off any pills or anything for that matter to anyone at any of these showings. So it began to bring up a lot of skepticism from authorities and in the court during this trial for what Kouri's intentions actually were going to end up being. And it ended up that Eric's instincts were going to be in question a lot, for maybe he was correct for thinking that Kouri was really trying to poison him. One of Eric's sisters actually recalled to authorities that a few years prior, Eric and Kouri had actually gone to a vacation in Greece just to celebrate and enjoy themselves. But around that time, he had called them to complain about a drink that he had and saying that he had become violently ill from that drink and that maybe, if anything was to happen, it was because of Kouri. So, those years prior in Greece, was that drink kind of a nod? Was Kouri plotting to have Eric let his guard down in these celebratory moments where they're supposed to be a loving romantic couple, but instead she was demising to put a little something into a little something that he might ingest? Through those years, Kouri would still be making deals in her business and investing heavily into flipping different houses. And in 2019, her mom, Lisa Darden, actually said that Kouri had stumbled upon something new, something special and different. It was actually a 10-acre estate of a property, this type of mansion that was unfinished. It was actually about half built and left abandoned, just waiting and catching dust, just looking for somebody to spot it and turn it around into something amazing. And it was actually in Heber City, Utah, near the Park City Ski Resort, where it was actually a coupling sort of environment and location that Kouri had gotten interested in. It was maybe her big break moment in her real estate career where she would think, well, I can really turn this thing around and sell it for a massive profit since it's this mansion that's next to a popular resort, along with a gigantic property. This led Kouri to be plotting something new. Kouri's attorney was also pretty supportive about this in saying that Kouri was eyeing it in a way that it was one of those dream gigs that she would have gotten throughout starting her career, that Kouri had always imagined something like this maybe coming along for her to take on. It was a 20,000 square foot mansion that was built, half built in 2017, a 4,000 square foot guest house, mind you, and around 2019 is when Kouri spotted it. She made a $2 million offer on it at the time. Her mom, Lisa Darden, said that the opportunity for Kouri and the potential that this flip had for her was jaw-dropping. She even stated in trial that her and Eric sat down with an accountant one time talking through this deal, and he ended up telling the two of them that if they did it right and got it done under budget, that they could potentially walk away with a flip worth $12 million.
A lot of excitement. I remember how excited she was.
But Eric would also have to help co-produce the $2 million.
It would have been a real easy flip. They wouldn't have had to sit on that for long.
And he was not willing to fork up the cash for it. Instead, he was more so hesitant, saying that it was a lot of money, and he was afraid that they were going to lose a lot on the investment, which goes against a lot of what Lisa said, in terms of how she described the two of them really more so celebrating the night that he had died, even so much so that they were drinking together, and he would say, "Hey, Kouri, come on, let's celebrate together. Let's have a shot, Kouri. Let's make this a big deal, because that's what it is, and we want to have this moment savored." Greg Skordas said during the trial that Eric never really wanted Kouri to go through with buying the mansion, and he continued saying, "I don't think he was ever in favor of it. He never wanted any part of this deal." And just a few days after Eric died, his family actually came forward and said that him and Kouri were actually arguing over the decision of buying this property. But in the end, Kouri was determined. She was really invested into the concept of this flip and gaining the $12 million. So she was really going to go through with it, whether he was there or not. It was March 3rd, 2022, during their celebrations of apparently being excited over flipping this house and this deal, when Eric and Kouri were having drinks together. She would end up making him a Moscow Mule, which is like a mixed vodka drink, and they would go to their bedroom. They would sit in their bed enjoying their drinks. But instead of them staying together that night, it is said that Kouri would go into the boys' bedroom because one of their sons was having a night terror. So she would go and fall asleep in their bedroom at night while Eric was left alone in the bedroom by himself for a few hours. So a few long hours pass. It's the middle of the night, and Kouri ends up finally waking up from their children's bedroom at around 3 a.m. So then she goes back to the bedroom to go to sleep with Eric. But when she gets there, instead of Eric being in the bed, he's now by the foot of the bed on the floor, lying down, motionless. So Kouri goes to check on him, going to wake him up to get him into bed, supposedly, when she touches him, and he's now cold to the touch. So at this point, Kouri calls 911, she gets the police involved, and once the police get there, they start their brief and initial investigations, and then he's sent to the hospital. But during all this time, it's now stated that once he gets to the hospital, and even while he was there laying on the floor, police were saying that he was dead already. Dead at the scene, pretty much. Now, during the time of the investigations, Kouri would actually tell investigators that she didn't have her phone on her, and while she was in the bedroom, if she had her phone on her with the kids, she might have been able to text Eric back and forth to see how he was doing, if he was asleep yet or not. But apparently she had left her phone charging in their own bedroom, so she didn't have it on her, supposedly. Because during the investigations, they found that, well, her phone was actually opened and unlocked and locked multiple times throughout the night. And there was actually messages exchanged back and forth throughout the entire night. So while Eric was supposedly alone until 3 a.m., Kouri wasn't away the entire time. She might have been there, in the area, while he was dying. So it was that phone being unlocked and locked that court documents said there were actually text messages exchanged throughout that night. Text messages that Kouri was making with CL, the housekeeper that produced and provided the fentanyl. Even though those messages were deleted, it was said that they were deleted from all the way back in February 2nd until just that night around the time that Eric had died. So this doesn't really describe just how devious and morbid Kouri was throughout all of this, or what the autopsy would soon report as far as the days after Eric had died, but Kouri would end up going on social media, the place where it's really not for your personal life, it's really for the surface level things, but Kouri would do exactly that and start to post about the loss of her husband and how hard it was for her kids and how strange it would be now that they had to be without him and how sad they had been. Not only that, but She would go on to call the insurance policy and claim a whopping $3,600,000 from it. 2 of those were from the actual business of C&E Masonry LLC that Kouri still had half ownership in. And not only that, but an additional $1.4 million, which was going to have construction costs and for the mortgage of their home, as far as what Kouri had claimed it for. But Eric's family, luckily, didn't really just let this slide. They started to just sort of combat this against Kouri and say that that's not the end of the story. There has to be more here, and she's not necessarily entitled to all that money just yet. Eric's sister, Kouri Richins, was now the beneficiary of his new trust, the trust that he made behind Kouri's back, and she actually filed a petition against Kouri saying that she's no longer qualifiable for the $3.6 million that she was claiming on his life insurance policy because she had committed a disqualifying act of homicide on Eric. This was Kouri pretty much telling Kouri, you know, this isn't yours. You're not entitled to this. You can go mind your own business and face the consequences because you basically just killed my brother.
His 3 boys' entire worlds and their perspectives on life changed. None of our lives will ever be the same. Eric died under horrendous circumstances. I am tormented at the thought of what he endured. I play it out in my mind. I go through the terrible sequence of events. I wonder when he realized he was in mortal danger. I wonder what Kouri may have said to him in his last moments. How long was he conscious, knowing he would die? Where were Eric's boys when all of this happened? Did they hear Eric's body fall to the ground? Did they catch a glimpse of their father taking his last breath? It's torture to think of. Why did Eric lose his life? Why did the boys lose their father? Was it because of Kouri's greed and desire to get life insurance and other assets? If so, that is abhorrent. How could anyone value human life so cheaply? I cannot comprehend it.
But this is where Kouri's true colors really started to show and just how morbid she really was this whole time. Right after Eric's death in March of 2022, really the whole following year after that, she dedicated her time to writing a book, a children's book called Are You With Me? And she would say that this book was dedicated to her 3 sons, and the questions, the confusion that they had towards Kouri, and saying, well, where is Dad, and what has happened to him at this point? Not only that, but she would then go on interviews to promote this book, saying that she hoped it would help her boys in processing their loss, to be comforted by the thought that their dad would always be with them in some sort of way. She would go on an interview with a news station called KTVX in an effort to promote her new book, saying that it was now the 1-year anniversary of her husband that passed away March 4th, 2023.
So my husband passed away unexpectedly last year. So it's March 4th was a 1-year anniversary for us, and he was 39. It completely took us all by shock. And we have 3 little boys, 10, 9, and 6. And, you know, my kids and I kind of wrote this book on the different emotions and grieving processes that we've experienced last year. And, you know, hoping that it can kind of help other kids, you know, deal with this and kind of, you know, find happiness some way or another. I'm new to all of this, so kind of doing all, you know, research and reading books and things to try and understand, you know, not only how to grieve as a widow, as a wife, but also, you know, with my kids, how to help them understand what just happened. And what I have kind of found is, as I mentioned, it's kind of the 3 C's is how I visualize it, and it's, you know, connection, continuity, and care. You know, explaining to my kid, just because he's not present here with us physically, that doesn't mean his presence isn't here with us, and he's doing these things with us, and he's, you know, here for birthdays, and he's here for Christmas, and, you know, and it's just comforting to them to know that, you know, they're not living this life alone. Like, Dad is still here, it's just in a different way. You know, I went on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and trying to find something that we could use to cope at nights. Nights are the hardest, it seems like, for everybody when, you know, dealing with anything. But I just wanted some story to read to my kids at night. And I just could not find anything. I couldn't find anything that really, you know, suited them or helped them find comfort and peace. And so, I was like, let's just write one. Let's understand that why they're feeling the way that they are feeling, and it's okay, and let's deal with it and talk about it.
There's a promotion right now. Get a free copy of the book.
And the hosts of this show would actually commend her for being a great mother and being there to support her kids. This was arguably an even more morbid and sad statement from the hosts themselves, calling Kouri an amazing mother, because first of all, you shouldn't just, that doesn't go lightly. They don't really know the back end of the story. And more so than that, it kind of goes into the dealings of more than just Kouri. And what I mean by that is, it's kind of a mother from a mother standpoint. Her own mother, Lisa Darden, actually had a romantic partner. And in an unsealed warrant in March of this year, 2024, there was actually some findings that Lisa's romantic partner actually died of a drug overdose from Oxy.
Seeing that mom was with Kouri Richins the night of her husband's death, and seeing that we have 2 drug overdoses of partners, that can change things all these years later.
However, back then, in 2006, while that case was being investigated for Lisa Darden, they actually didn't pursue it as a homicide. So Lisa Darden actually ended up succeeding in the way that she went about it, if it was a homicide to begin with, because she was a beneficiary of that life insurance policy from her partner in 2006. But Greg Skordas, who is a spokesperson for Eric and his family, ended up going on to say that
Nothing about this seems really surprising, because we always felt that Kouri's mother was in some way involved in this. This is just more, I think, evidence against Kouri, even though it's purportedly looking at her mother. Parallels are really very similar and really kind of spooky.
it speaks to the planning, the premeditation, the structure that the two had gone about this whole case for. And in terms of thinking that maybe if my mother can do this and get away with it, well, I probably can too. And so she was probably like, if it worked once, it can work again, and maybe I can get a payout for Eric. During the trial, they had stated that since the proximity of Lisa and Kouri, they were so close to one another, they were always talking through everything, and especially during this case, that Lisa might have been part of Kouri's orchestration, and she might have helped her plan all of this out in terms of how to poison or have Eric overdose. Kouri's attorney, Sky Lazaro, had actually stated during this trial that although it was a tragedy that Lisa lost her partner to a drug overdose and had benefited through the life insurance policy, even though it was tragic, it had nothing to do with this case. And it actually wasn't any different from a lot of families' cases throughout the country, because it was just kind of a typical way of getting money from your partner's life insurance policy, that happens quite frequently. So in terms of relating it to this case was just based on pure conspiracy theory and really didn't have anything to do with the basis of what Kouri was dealing with. I don't even know how she can go about saying that, considering the past times that Kouri had allegedly tried to poison Eric in the first place, or even steal money from him. Now, ultimately, the investigations during this case would eventually lead to enough evidence and motive as to how and why Kouri would do this to Eric. And so, in May of 2023, she was ultimately charged with aggravated murder and drug charges for the night that Eric died. The puzzling part about this side of the case is that those charges were brought on to Kouri just 1 month after she had appeared on that KTVX Good Things Utah talk show, where she would go on to interview and promote her book regarding Eric's death, and the book that would speak on how to cope with kids and losing their parents and being called an amazing mother. It's just sick.
I'm anxious. I'm anxious to prove my innocence. I'm anxious to get to trial, and I'm ready to get this one heck of a fight. You took an innocent mom away from her babies.
Prosecutors alleged in a filing March 25th, 2024 of this year that Eric was initially poisoned on Valentine's Day for that dinner that he had with Kouri, where she made him his favorite sandwich. Now, just a few weeks later, he was also again poisoned that night when he had that Moscow Mule drink in bed right before going to sleep, and that is actually what had killed him, as autopsy reports had revealed, which they actually revealed that he was poisoned with 5 times the amount of lethal dosage of fentanyl even required to kill an adult human being.
Silent for a year, ripped away from my kids, my family, my life, living with the media, telling the world who they think I am, what they think I've done, or how they think I've lived. and it's time to start speaking up.
Also, it was said during court hearings that Eric didn't even really have allergies, which was supposed to be the original culprit of that day on Valentine's when he and Kouri were having a nice romantic dinner and she had made him his favorite sandwich. But instead, those kinds of reactions can be caused by opioids, and opioids, including things like fentanyl, can cause pseudo-allergic reactions, including hives. It was also found in charging documents in court that Kouri had actually been texting her friend, and not only texting a friend casually, but texting them that Eric never even took an EpiPen shot. He never took an entire bottle of Benadryl, and he never even had hives. But she did allegedly sign and forge his signature on some insurance documents. And just a few weeks before this happened, and not only that, but 10 days after his death, she would have actually been entitled to $100,000 of death benefits if this had been an accidental death or just ruled out from age or a heart attack or anything like that of natural causes. So, well, this case was very long and winded over a few years. There was a lot of evidence to go through, but Kouri was indefinitely charged and booked, and her trial has been processing, and she was actually charged with 2 counts of distribution of a controlled substance in both incidents that had Eric basically having an allergic reaction, which was apparently the first cause of this, but in the end it was the poisoning that Kouri had processed for him. Now, there was a 3rd charge that was initially dismissed, but through amended documents there is a new count. But it wasn't just one count of anything, it was actually multiple counts. Now, these counts were some against Eric, most of them were. It was 3 counts of forgery, 2 counts of insurance fraud, and 2 counts of mortgage fraud. And not only that, but it was stated in trial that Kouri was actually in some deep stuff financially with Kouri Richins Realty LLC, her real estate company that she was supposed to be doing so well with. She was actually in pretty deep waters. They called it financial distress. So the type of distress that has you getting from loan sharks, pretty much. These big lenders, and you're in deep waters of $1.8 million in debt. So she definitely wasn't doing too well at this point. While also being incarcerated in Summit County, well, she wasn't done there. Kouri still had one more thing up her sleeve, and it was actually 6 things. It was a 6-page note, 6 pages, that was supposed to be telling a story about how her mother and her brother, Ronald Darden, they were supposed to testify against Eric. And Ronald Darden was specifically supposed to say something along the lines of, well, it wasn't actually Kouri who put anything into Eric's food or drinks that would poison him, like evidence had found, but it was instead Eric himself that was contacting some random drug dealer out of Mexico for these drugs of fentanyl. Apparently Eric was buying a couple of thousands of dollars of fentanyl because he was now this drug addict that Kouri was trying to paint him as in court, all so that she could have charges against her for homicide and fraud dismissed. She said that it was not a note that was supposed to be plotting against Eric. It was instead something that she was writing. It was supposed to be a fictional novel that she was now working on as a new project for her new author career in jail. And apparently this drug dealer, everything about this, he was supposed to be a drug dealer that was working a ranch in Mexico. The story just continues to get crazy, doesn't it? Now, after that 6-page note, Kouri and her mother actually had a meeting together while she was incarcerated. In this meeting, her and her mother were facing each other, and so during it, she told her mother that her and her brother were not to meet anywhere that wasn't in person. It had to be in person because she was worried that her mother's house was now bugged, so that detectives or investigators could now see and hear what they were plotting against Eric. And then, on September 13th of 2023, it was said that she had actually held up this letter to her mother, and her mother was supposed to read it in front of her silently, and it was more of this plotting, this scheming against Eric to dismiss the charges against Kouri. But after investigations went on to find this letter, it was apparently flushed and trashed, so they could never find it. So now at this point, Kouri is no longer 23 years old like she was when she first married Eric. She's now 33 years old, and ultimately she was indefinitely charged with the murder of Eric. The court did inevitably decide to not give Kouri the death penalty. Instead, they decided to give her 25 years to life in prison. Now, As far as the brutality goes for the attempts and the scheming that she did against Eric, it definitely seems like she deserves more than 25 to life, if you ask me. Not only did the court eventually rule 25 years to life for Kouri, but they also ruled that it was now time to give the beneficiary of Eric for his business C&E Stonemasonry LLC. The beneficiary was now to get $2 million and half of everything that Eric owned, including part of his business, any money that he was pulling in, or assets like the home. And whoever was this beneficiary was supposed to be on Eric, his living trust that he had made with the new lawyer. As far as taking Kouri out of it, yeah, she was no longer the beneficiary. So now it would go to his sister, Katie. Katie was now to uphold everything for Eric. She was now getting all the cash from his life insurance policy. Although there is some justice brought to this case, Kouri is getting her 25 years to life. She's no longer plotting or devising any schemes to harm anybody else.
What I've really done is protect Eric at all costs. What I really didn't do is murder my husband. I could not and would not ever do that to Eric, or anyone for that matter.
But unfortunately, Eric is no longer with us, so these 3 boys that were 10, 9, and 6 years old, they now need somebody to raise them. They're going to be left alone, and that's still a mystery in this case. Nobody really knows what's going to happen with the boys. But Katie, she's getting a payout. Katie's getting the $2 million, half of Eric's business that Cody is still co-owner in, half of all assets that were written by Eric, and decisions to the home. And so it really seems like Katie should really fill that void in what the boys need. They still need to be raised. They're still babies. They need some sort of guardian to help them through life, instead of just being, well, foster children, orphans. It really seems like Katie now needs to step in for that role. And that's the justice that I hope is brought on for the rest of this case. But if you guys enjoyed this case and want to see more true crime stories, I'm going to be covering a lot more true crime cases. You can find those on my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.